My husband left me for the nanny and took everything. Desperate, I started working cleaning bathrooms in restaurants. One day, on my way home from work, I found a homeless man shivering, blue from the cold and sick. I decided to cover him, giving up my own coat. That's when he grabbed my wrist and said, "They will pay for what they did." I froze. Minutes later, 5 limousines arrived. When his billionaire son stepped out, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Maxine Reynolds, and at 61 years old, I thought I knew exactly who I was. Wife to Damon for 35 years, mother figure to our nanny Vienna, keeper of our beautiful home on Elm Street. I thought I understood my place in the world until that January morning when everything I believed about my life crumbled like day-old bread. I was making coffee in our kitchen, the same ritual I'd performed for decades, when I heard Vienna's laugh drift down from upstairs. There was something different about it, something intimate that made my stomach clench. She was supposed to be cleaning the guest bathroom, but that laugh, it was coming from our bedroom. The wooden stairs creaked under my feet as I climbed them, each step feeling heavier than the last. The master bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I saw them. Damon, my husband of 35 years, had his arms wrapped around Vienna, our 25-year-old nanny. They were kissing with the passion of new lovers, completely oblivious to my presence. My hand gripped the doorframe so tightly my knuckles went white. Vienna was wearing my silk robe, the one Damon had given me for our 20th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was literally wearing my life while stealing my husband. "Damon?" The word escaped my lips as barely a whisper, but it was enough to make them spring apart. Vienna had the decency to look embarrassed for exactly 3 seconds before her expression shifted to something that looked almost like relief. Damon, on the other hand, straightened his shoulders and looked at me with cold eyes I didn't recognize. "Maxine, we need to talk," he said, adjusting his shirt with the casual confidence of a man who'd been planning this moment. I stood there in my own bedroom doorway, feeling like an intruder. "How long?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. 2 years, Vienna said, lifting her chin defiantly. "We didn't plan it, but we fell in love." 2 years. I thought about all the family dinners, the Christmas mornings, the times I'd defended Vienna to my sister when she said hiring such a young, attractive nanny was asking for trouble. 2 years of living a lie while they conducted their affair right under my nose. "Pack your things, Maxine," Damon said, his voice matter of fact. "My lawyer will contact you about the divorce proceedings." I felt my world tilt. Pack my things? This is my home too, Damon. I've lived here for 15 years. Actually, it's not. He pulled out a folder from the nightstand drawer, clearly prepared for this conversation. "The house is in my name only. I bought it with my inheritance money before we refinanced. You have no legal claim to it." The folder contained papers I'd signed years ago, documents I'd trusted him to handle because he was better with finances. Looking at them now, I realized how naive I'd been. Every major asset was in his name alone. "You planned this," I said, the realization hitting me like cold water. "You've been planning this for years." Vienna stepped closer to Damon, her hand sliding possessively around his arm. "We didn't want to hurt you, Maxine, but we can't keep living a lie. Damon deserves to be happy." The casual way she dismissed 35 years of my marriage as a lie made my chest burn with anger. But it was Damon's next words that truly destroyed me. "You've let yourself go, Maxine. Look at yourself." His eyes swept over me with disgust. "When was the last time you went to the gym? When was the last time you made an effort with your appearance? Vienna makes me feel young again, alive again." I looked down at myself, seeing what he saw. 61 years old, gray roots showing because I'd been putting off salon appointments to save money for Vienna's college fund. Comfortable clothes because I spent my days maintaining our home, not trying to seduce someone else's husband. I want you out by tomorrow, Damon continued. Vienna's moving in permanently. Where am I supposed to go? The question came out smaller than I intended. That's not my problem anymore. That night, I sat in our guest room surrounded by hastily packed boxes, calling every friend I thought I had. Most of the calls went to voicemail. The few who answered offered lukewarm sympathy and excuses about why I couldn't stay with them. These women I'd known for decades, hosted for dinner parties, supported through their own divorces, suddenly had no room in their lives for me. The attorney Damon hired was ruthless. Judge Patricia Wells seemed determined to move through our case as quickly as possible, barely glancing at the evidence I tried to present about my contributions to our marriage. 35 years of partnership meant nothing when all the assets were legally in Damon's name. Mrs. Reynolds, the judge said, barely looking up from her papers, you have no documented financial contributions to the marital assets. The prenuptial agreement you signed waives your right to alimony. The court awards you a settlement of $12,000 and requires you to vacate the marital home within 72 hours. $12,000. For 35 years of marriage, that's what my life was worth. I moved into a studio apartment on Oak Avenue, 942 Oak Avenue, Unit 3B to be exact. $850 a month for a space smaller than our old master bathroom. The walls were thin, the neighbors loud, and the single window faced a brick wall so close I could touch it if I opened the window and reached out. The job search was humiliating. At 61, with no recent work experience, my options were limited. Department stores wanted younger faces. Offices wanted computer skills I didn't have. The only places that would hire me were the ones desperate enough to take anyone willing to work for minimum wage. Murphy's Family Restaurant on 3rd Street hired me to clean bathrooms and mop floors. $11 an hour, 25 hours a week. The work was backbreaking, the chemicals harsh on my hands, but it was honest work. I also picked up shifts at Corner Coffee, wiping down tables and refilling napkin dispensers for $10.50 an hour. Every morning, I woke up in that cramped studio and wondered how my life had shrunk so small. The woman who used to plan charity galas was now scrubbing toilets. The woman who used to worry about which wine to serve with dinner was now counting quarters to buy ramen noodles. Meanwhile, Vienna had moved into my old life seamlessly. I tried not to look, but social media made it impossible to avoid completely. There she was, posting photos from my garden, wearing my jewelry, sleeping in my bed with my husband. She even had the audacity to post a picture wearing my favorite blue dress, the one I'd worn to our 25th anniversary dinner, with the caption, "Living my best life with my love." The comments were full of people I used to call friends, congratulating her on her happiness, calling her and Damon a beautiful couple. No one mentioned me. It was as if I'd been erased from my own life. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I was walking home from my evening shift at Murphy's when I saw Vienna and Damon at Giovanni's, the Italian restaurant where he used to take me for special occasions. They were sitting at our table, the corner booth with the view of the garden. Vienna was wearing my pearl earrings, the ones that had belonged to my grandmother. I stood on the sidewalk outside, invisible behind the glass, watching them share dessert and laugh at something on Vienna's phone. Damon looked younger, more animated than I'd seen him in years. Vienna looked radiant, glowing with the confidence of a woman who'd won everything she'd wanted. That's when it hit me that this wasn't temporary. This wasn't a midlife crisis that would burn itself out. This was my new reality. They had my house, my friends, my husband, my life. And I had nothing but a studio apartment that smelled like industrial bleach and a job that left my back aching every night. I walked the rest of the way home in the dark, my feet heavy on the cracked sidewalk. In my mailbox, there was a single envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo. Vienna and Damon in what used to be my kitchen. Vienna wearing my wedding ring on a chain around her neck like a trophy. On the back, someone had written, "Some people get everything they deserve." By September, I had perfected the art of being invisible. 6 months had passed since the divorce, and I'd learned to move through the world like a shadow, eyes down, shoulders hunched, trying not to take up too much space. The woman who used to command attention at charity events now scurried from job to job, hoping no one from my old life would recognize me. The routine never varied. Morning shift at Corner Coffee from 6 to noon, cleaning tables and restocking supplies while trying to avoid the breakfast rush of professionals who looked right through me. Then a quick change of clothes in the tiny employee bathroom before heading to Murphy's restaurant for the evening shift, mopping floors and scrubbing toilets until midnight. My hands were permanently stained now, cracked and raw from the industrial cleaning chemicals. I'd tried wearing gloves, but they made it harder to grip the mop handle, and I couldn't afford to lose either job. Every dollar counted when you were living on the edge of homelessness. The studio apartment had become my entire world. 942 Oak Avenue, Unit 3B, 4th floor, no elevator. The walls were so thin I could hear every argument from the neighbors, every footstep in the hallway. The radiator clanked all night when it worked, which wasn't often. When it didn't work, I slept wearing every piece of clothing I owned. I'd pawned my wedding ring in July when the electricity bill came due. $2,300 for a ring that had symbolized 35 years of marriage, sold to a bored teenager behind bulletproof glass who barely looked at it before making his offer. I took it because I needed to eat and keep the lights on. Vienna, meanwhile, was living her best life on social media. Every day brought new photos of her and Damon at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to the mountains, shopping sprees downtown. She'd had her hair done at the salon I used to frequent, gotten her nails done at my old spa, was wearing clothes I recognized from my own wardrobe. The worst part wasn't the luxury, though. It was how young and vibrant she looked beside Damon. In 35 years of marriage, I'd rarely seen him smile the way he smiled at her. It made me wonder if he'd ever truly loved me, or if I'd just been convenient until something better came along. September 3rd started like any other day. The coffee shop was busier than usual, filled with students from the nearby college grabbing caffeine before morning classes. I was wiping down tables, trying to stay out of everyone's way, when a group of young women settled into the corner booth. "Oh my God, is that her?" one of them whispered, not quite quietly enough. I kept my head down, but I could feel them staring. One of them was holding up her phone, probably showing the others something. "That's definitely her," another one said. Vienna posted a story about her yesterday. Said she felt bad for her, but that some people just can't handle getting older gracefully. My cheeks burned, but I kept wiping the same table over and over, pretending I couldn't hear them. She used to be married to Vienna's boyfriend, right? Before Vienna? Yeah, Vienna says she was really bitter about the divorce, like obsessed with getting revenge or something. That's why Vienna and Damon had to get a restraining order. My hand stopped moving. Restraining order? I'd never contacted either of them since the divorce. I'd gone out of my way to avoid them completely. "Vienna's so brave for speaking out about it," the first girl said. "Dealing with a crazy ex-wife can't be easy." I wanted to turn around, to tell them they were wrong, that I'd never done anything to Vienna or Damon except exist. But what was the point? They'd already decided who was the villain in this story. And it wasn't the young, beautiful woman who'd stolen someone else's husband. I finished my shift in silence and walked to Murphy's restaurant with my head full of static. Vienna was telling people I was dangerous, unstable, seeking revenge. She was rewriting history to make herself the victim and me the villain. And people were believing her because she was young and pretty, and I was just a bitter old woman who'd been cast aside. The evening shift at Murphy's was brutal. The dinner rush had been particularly messy, with food ground into the floors and toilets that I didn't want to think about too closely. My back was screaming by the time I finished, and my knees felt like they might give out at any moment. It was past midnight when I finally left the restaurant, stepping out into the September night air. It had been warm during the day, but now there was a chill that cut through my thin jacket. I'd learned to dress in layers, but none of my clothes were really adequate for the weather. I kept putting off buying a proper coat because I couldn't afford it. The walk home was 10 blocks through increasingly questionable neighborhoods. I'd learned which streets to avoid, which alleys stayed lit, where the bus stops were if I ever had enough money for fare. Tonight, I was taking my usual route when I saw him. An elderly man was sitting on the sidewalk at the corner of 5th and Main, leaning against a brick wall under a broken streetlight. His clothes were dirty and torn, and he was shivering violently in the cold. Even from a distance, I could see he was in bad shape. I should have kept walking. I had my own problems, my own struggles. The smart thing would have been to call 911 and let someone else deal with it. But something about the way he was huddled there, alone and forgotten, reminded me too much of myself. I approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. As I got closer, I could see he was older than I'd first thought, probably in his 70s. His clothes were expensive once upon a time, but now they were filthy and inadequate for the weather. His face was gaunt, his lips tinged blue from the cold. "Sir?" I said gently. "Are you okay?" He looked up at me with eyes that seemed far too alert for someone in his condition. "Cold," he whispered. "So cold." Without thinking, I shrugged out of my jacket. It wasn't much, just a thin windbreaker I'd bought at a thrift store, but it was better than nothing. I draped it around his shoulders, even though it left me standing in just a t-shirt and jeans in the 40-degree night. "There's a shelter about 6 blocks from here," I told him. "Can you walk?" He shook his head weakly. "No phone, no one to call." I looked around, hoping to see someone else, anyone else who could help. But the street was empty except for distant traffic and the occasional police siren. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, requesting an ambulance for a homeless man who needed medical attention. While we waited, I sat down beside him on the cold sidewalk, sharing what little body heat I had. He was shaking so badly, I was worried about hypothermia. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep him conscious. "Harrison," he mumbled. "Harrison Blackstone." I'd heard that name somewhere before, but I couldn't place it. "Do you have family, Harrison? Someone I could call?" His grip on my jacket tightened. "Had a son. Lost him. Lost everything." The paramedics arrived 15 minutes later, but it felt like hours. I'd given Harrison my phone number, though I doubted he'd remember it. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "They will pay," he said, his voice suddenly clear and strong. "They will pay for what they did to you." I stared at him, confused. "I'm sorry." "The ones who hurt you. I can see it in your eyes. They will pay." Before I could ask what he meant, the paramedics were wheeling him away. I stood on the sidewalk in my t-shirt, watching the ambulance disappear into the night, wondering what he'd seen in my face that made him say that. The walk home was miserable without my jacket. By the time I reached my building, I was shivering as badly as Harrison had been. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment, my teeth chattering, my hands too cold to work the key properly. Inside, I made a cup of instant coffee with hands that shook from more than just the cold. I kept thinking about Harrison's words. "They will pay for what they did to you." It was like he'd looked into my soul and seen all the hurt and humiliation I'd been carrying. I tried to put it out of my mind as I got ready for bed, but something about the encounter stayed with me. There had been something in Harrison's eyes, something that suggested he was more than just another homeless man on the street. The next morning, I called the hospital to check on him, but they wouldn't give me any information since I wasn't family. I left my name and number with the nurse, asking her to tell him that Maxine had called to check on him. 3 days passed without any word. I went to work, came home, repeated the cycle, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night. About the way Harrison had looked at me, the certainty in his voice when he'd made that promise about making someone pay. On Saturday morning, my day off, I was doing laundry in the building's dingy basement when I heard a commotion outside. Car doors slamming, voices calling orders, the sound of expensive engines idling. I looked out the small basement window and saw something that made my heart stop. 5 black limousines were parked outside my building, their windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. Men in dark suits were standing beside them, talking into earpieces like something out of a movie. And walking toward my building's entrance, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to having doors opened for him, was a man in an expensive overcoat who looked remarkably like Harrison. But this Harrison was clean, well-dressed, and surrounded by people who clearly worked for him. This wasn't the homeless man I'd found on the street. This was someone with serious money and serious power. My phone rang, echoing in the empty laundry room. Unknown number. "Hello?" "Maxine," Harrison's voice said, clear and strong now. "We need to talk." I stared at my phone in disbelief, Harrison's voice still echoing in my ear as I watched through the basement window. The man approaching my building looked nothing like the shivering homeless person I'd helped 3 nights ago. This Harrison moved with purpose, his posture straight and commanding, flanked by what could only be bodyguards or assistants. "I don't understand," I said into the phone, my voice barely above a whisper. "How did you find me? How do you have my number? You gave it to me, remember, when the paramedics came." His voice was warm, patient. "Maxine, I know this is confusing. Could you come upstairs? I'd like to explain everything." My hands were shaking as I climbed the 4 flights to my apartment, abandoning my half-finished laundry. Each step felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's life. 3 days ago, I'd been scrubbing toilets and giving my jacket to a homeless man. Now that same man was calling me from a fleet of limousines parked outside my building. I reached my door just as there was a soft knock. Through the peephole, I saw Harrison standing there alone, though I could hear quiet voices from the hallway behind him. He looked distinguished now, wearing a charcoal wool overcoat that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. His gray hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven, but his eyes were the same ones that had looked at me with such strange intensity that night. I opened the door slowly, still trying to reconcile the 2 versions of Harrison I'd encountered. "May I come in?" he asked gently. I stepped aside, suddenly embarrassed by my tiny apartment. Harrison entered and looked around without judgment, taking in the second-hand furniture, the clothes hanging from every available hook, the stack of bills on my single table. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the only decent chair I owned. "Can I get you some coffee? It's instant, but—" "That would be lovely, thank you." As I busied myself with the coffee, Harrison settled into the chair with the careful movements of someone older than he appeared. When I handed him the mug, our fingers touched briefly, and I noticed his hands were soft now, manicured. Nothing like the rough, cold hands I'd held that night. "You're confused," he said, reading my expression. "Of course you are. Let me start at the beginning." I sat on the edge of my bed, the only other place to sit in the cramped space, and waited. "My name is Harrison Blackstone. I'm 73 years old, and until 3 days ago, I was one of the loneliest men in Dallas." He paused, sipping the instant coffee without complaint. "I built Blackstone Industries from nothing 40 years ago. Hotels, real estate, manufacturing. The company is worth approximately $2.8 billion. I nearly choked on my coffee. Billion? Yes, but money means nothing when you have no one to share it with, no one who cares whether you live or die." His voice carried a weight of sadness that seemed to age him before my eyes. "I made many mistakes over the years, Maxine. The biggest was losing my son." Harrison set down his mug and stared out my small window at the brick wall beyond. "Marcus and I had a falling out 15 years ago. He disagreed with some of my business practices, thought I was too ruthless, too focused on profit over people. He said I'd become someone he didn't recognize anymore." "What happened?" "He walked away. From the business. From his inheritance. From me. I was too proud to go after him, too stubborn to admit he might be right. Harrison's jaw tightened. I told myself I didn't need him. I had my empire, my success. But success without family is just elaborate loneliness. I thought about my own family, the friends who'd abandoned me after the divorce, the isolation that had become my constant companion. Where has he been all these years? He became a doctor, pediatric surgery, lives modestly, refuses to use the Blackstone name professionally. He won't take my calls, returns my letters unopened. Harrison looked directly at me. For 15 years, I've had investigators keeping tabs on him, making sure he's safe, but I've respected his wish for distance, until 3 nights ago. What changed? Harrison smiled, and for the first time since he'd entered my apartment, he looked genuinely happy. You did, Maxine. You changed everything. I frowned, not understanding. That night when you found me on the street, when you gave me your jacket and sat with me in the cold, when you called for help and refused to leave until the paramedics arrived, you showed me something I'd forgotten existed: compassion without expectation, kindness without agenda. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Harrison said firmly. They wouldn't have. I know because I've been testing it for months. My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. Testing it? Harrison stood and walked to my window, his hands clasped behind his back. After Marcus left, I became obsessed with understanding human nature. I wanted to know if genuine goodness still existed, or if everyone was just out for themselves. So I started an experiment. He turned back to me, his expression serious. Once a month for the past year, I've disguised myself as a homeless person and positioned myself in different parts of the city. Same routine each time. I'd dress in old clothes, make myself look desperate, and see how people reacted. The implications of what he was saying slowly sank in. You were testing people? Yes. And in 11 attempts, you were the first person to stop. The very first person to show genuine concern for a stranger with nothing to offer in return. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Honored that I'd passed some test I didn't know I was taking, but also unsettled by the deception. What about the other people? The ones who didn't stop? Businessmen who stepped over me without a glance. Couples who crossed the street to avoid me. Teenagers who laughed and took photos. A few people threw coins, but no one stopped to check if I was actually okay. No one sacrificed their own comfort for mine. Harrison returned to his chair, leaning forward earnestly. But you, Maxine, you didn't just help. You gave me the jacket off your back when you were already cold. You stayed with me even though you were clearly exhausted from work. You called for help and waited to make sure I was safe. I couldn't just leave you there. Exactly. And that's what made me realize something important. His eyes grew bright with an emotion I couldn't identify. My son was right about me. I had become someone focused only on profit and power. But seeing your kindness reminded me of who I used to be, who I could be again. He pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. I called Marcus yesterday for the first time in 15 years. I told him about meeting you, about what you did for a stranger who had nothing. I told him I wanted to be the kind of man who deserved that kindness. Did he answer? He did. We talked for 2 hours. Harrison's voice cracked slightly. He's coming to see me this weekend. After 15 years, my son is coming home. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything he'd told me. A billionaire had been testing humanity's capacity for kindness, and somehow I'd been the one to restore his faith in people and reunite him with his estranged son. Maxine, Harrison said gently, I know about your situation. Not the details, but I can see you're struggling. A woman your age shouldn't be working 2 minimum-wage jobs and living in a place like this unless something went very wrong. Heat rose in my cheeks. I wasn't used to discussing my circumstances with anyone, let alone a billionaire stranger. I'm not offering charity, he continued quickly, reading my discomfort. I'm offering opportunity. You showed me something valuable that night. The kind of character I want in my organization. I'd like to offer you a position with Blackstone Industries. I don't have any business experience, I said automatically. I've been out of the workforce for 35 years. Experience can be taught, character cannot. Harrison reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card made of thick, cream-colored paper. I'm looking for someone to help me evaluate people, to assess character and authenticity. Someone who understands what it means to struggle, what it means to maintain dignity in difficult circumstances. I took the card, running my thumb over the embossed lettering. I don't understand what you're asking me to do. Business is fundamentally about people, Maxine. I make decisions about partnerships, investments, hiring, based on my assessment of character. But I've been insulated by wealth and power for so long that I've lost touch with genuine human nature. I need someone who can see what I can't see anymore. He stood, preparing to leave. The position comes with a salary of $5,000 per month to start, health benefits, and an office at our downtown headquarters. You'd be working directly with me, helping assess potential business partners and key hires. $5,000 per month, more than I currently made in 3 months of backbreaking work. Why me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't know anything about me. Harrison paused at the door, turning back with a smile that transformed his entire face. I know everything I need to know. You're someone who gives away your coat when you're already cold, who sits on a sidewalk with a stranger in the middle of the night, who sees suffering and responds with action instead of indifference. He gestured around my apartment, and I know that despite losing everything, you're still fighting. You're working 2 jobs, paying your bills, maintaining your dignity. That tells me you have the strength to rebuild and the character to rebuild honorably. I need time to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. He handed me another card, this one with a phone number written on the back. This is my personal number. Call me when you're ready to talk. After he left, I sat in my tiny apartment holding his business cards, trying to convince myself this had really happened. Outside my window, I could hear the limousines starting up, expensive engines purring as they pulled away from my building. I thought about Vienna, probably posting another social media update from my old house. I thought about Damon, living his new life without a care for the woman he'd discarded. I thought about the friends who'd abandoned me, the judge who'd dismissed 35 years of marriage as worthless, the people who looked through me like I didn't exist. For months, I'd felt powerless, invisible, forgotten. But sitting there with Harrison's offer in my hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced since January. I felt like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something entirely different. I spent 3 sleepless nights staring at Harrison's business card, turning it over in my hands until the edges were soft from wear. The thick cream paper felt substantial, real, but the opportunity it represented seemed too good to be true. After months of rejection and humiliation, the idea that someone might actually value me felt like a cruel joke the universe was playing. On Tuesday morning, I called in sick to both my jobs for the first time since I'd started working them. I couldn't face another day of scrubbing toilets and wiping tables while Harrison's offer burned a hole in my mind. Instead, I sat in my apartment researching Blackstone Industries on my phone, trying to understand exactly who Harrison was and whether his offer could possibly be legitimate. The search results were staggering. Blackstone Industries was indeed worth billions, with holdings across the country. Harrison's photo appeared in dozens of business articles, always looking composed and powerful in expensive suits. There were mentions of his estranged son, a doctor who'd chosen to distance himself from the family business, but very little detail about their relationship. What struck me most was how different Harrison looked in these professional photos compared to both versions I'd met, the homeless man on the street and the gentle visitor to my apartment. In the business articles, his expression was cold, calculating, exactly the kind of ruthless businessman his son had apparently rejected. By Thursday, I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed his personal number before I could change my mind. "Maxine," Harrison answered on the second ring, as if he'd been waiting for my call. "I was hoping to hear from you." "I've been thinking about your offer," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm interested, but I have questions." "Of course you do. Would you like to meet for coffee? Somewhere more comfortable than your apartment?" We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown, away from my neighborhood and away from his business district. I chose my best outfit, which wasn't saying much. A navy blue dress I'd bought at a consignment shop and the only pair of shoes I owned that weren't designed for standing on restaurant floors for hours. Harrison was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee waiting. He looked more casual than during his apartment visit, wearing a simple gray sweater and dark pants, but still unmistakably expensive. When he saw me, he stood and smiled warmly. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I took the liberty of ordering you a latte. I hope that's all right." "It's perfect." I slid into the booth across from him, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. It had been months since I'd had a real latte instead of instant coffee. "Harrison, I need to understand what you're really asking me to do. This position you've described, evaluating character, it sounds too vague to be a real job." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Smart question. Let me be more specific." He pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of photographs. "These are potential business partners I'm currently considering. A hotel developer in Austin, a manufacturing company owner in Houston, a restaurant chain looking for investment capital." I studied the faces, ordinary-looking business people in professional headshots. "What I need," Harrison continued, "is someone to meet with these people, spend time with them, and give me honest assessments of their character. Are they trustworthy? Do they treat employees fairly? Are they the kind of people I want to be in business with long-term?" "You want me to spy on them?" "Not spy, no. I want you to be yourself, a potential consultant perhaps, or someone considering their services. Have conversations, observe how they interact with staff, with family, with people they think can't help them." Harrison leaned forward. "I've learned that people reveal their true nature when they think no one important is watching." I thought about this, understanding the logic but feeling uncomfortable with the deception. "Why not just do background checks? Hire private investigators?" "I do that too, but financial records and legal histories don't tell you if someone treats waiters rudely or lies to their spouse. They don't tell you if someone is kind to people who can't benefit them." His expression grew serious. "I've made too many bad partnerships over the years because I focused on profit margins instead of personal character." "And you think I can assess character better than you can?" "I know you can. You proved it the night you helped me." Harrison sat back, studying my face. "Maxine, wealth and power create barriers. When people know who I am, they perform for me. They show me what they think I want to see. But you've lived in the real world. You've experienced both privilege and poverty. You can see through pretense in a way I no longer can." The waitress refilled our coffee cups, and I noticed how Harrison thanked her genuinely, asking about her day. It was a small thing, but it reinforced his point about character being revealed in small interactions. "What about my background?" I asked. "I don't have a college degree. I've been a housewife for 35 years. That's not a weakness, it's an asset. You've managed a household, dealt with contractors, navigated social situations, raised children. Those are all transferable skills." Harrison's voice grew gentler. "More importantly, you've recently experienced what it's like to be dismissed, overlooked, treated as if you don't matter. That perspective is invaluable." I winced at the accuracy of his description. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I don't mean to be insensitive, but your recent experiences have given you insights that money can't buy. You know what it's like to be vulnerable, to need help, to be ignored by people who should care. That understanding will make you better at this job than someone who's never struggled. We talked for another hour about practical details. The position would start at $5,000 per month with a comprehensive benefits package. I'd have an office at Blackstone Industries, but would spend most of my time in the field, meeting with potential partners and observing their operations. Harrison would provide me with cover stories and background information for each assignment. "There's one more thing," Harrison said as we prepared to leave. "This Saturday, my son Marcus is coming to visit. It'll be the first time I've seen him in 15 years, and it's happening because of what you did for me that night. I'd like you to meet him." "I don't think that's appropriate," I said quickly. "That's a private family moment." "Actually, I think your presence might help. Marcus left because he thought I'd lost touch with basic human decency. Meeting you, hearing about how your kindness inspired me to change, might help him understand that I'm serious about being a better person." The request made me uncomfortable, but there was something vulnerable in Harrison's expression that made it hard to refuse. "Where would this meeting take place?" "My home. Saturday afternoon. Nothing formal, just coffee and conversation." He handed me an address written on yet another business card. "If you decide to take the position, consider it your first assignment, helping me reconnect with the most important person in my life." That evening, I sat in my apartment weighing the decision. $5,000 per month would transform my life completely. I could move to a decent apartment, buy proper clothes, stop scrubbing toilets for a living. I could rebuild some version of the dignity I'd lost. But the job itself felt strange, almost too good to be true. Harrison wanted to pay me excellent money to have conversations with people and report back on their character. It sounded like something from a movie, not a real career opportunity. I thought about my alternatives. I could keep working 2 minimum wage jobs, living in this cramped studio, hoping nothing unexpected happened to destroy the fragile stability I'd managed to create. In 5 years, I'd be 66 with aching joints and no savings, still cleaning other people's messes. Or I could take a chance on Harrison's offer, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. On Friday morning, I called Harrison's personal number. "I'll take the position," I said without preamble when he answered. "Excellent. Can you start Monday?" "Yes." "And Harrison? I'll come to your house on Saturday to meet Marcus." "Thank you, Maxine. I think you're going to change my life in ways I can't even imagine yet." After hanging up, I looked around my tiny apartment with different eyes. This might be one of the last nights I'd spend here. One of the last nights I'd fall asleep to the sound of my neighbors arguing through thin walls. Whatever happened next, I was stepping into something entirely new. I thought about Damon and Vienna, probably planning their evening in my old house, completely unaware that the woman they'd discarded was about to begin a new chapter of her life. They'd written me off as a pathetic failure, someone to be forgotten and ignored. They had no idea that in less than 72 hours, I'd be working for one of the most powerful men in Texas, with the resources to do whatever I decided was necessary. For the first time in months, I fell asleep with a smile on my face. Saturday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, matching my nervous mood as I drove through the affluent Highland Park neighborhood toward Harrison's address. The houses here were massive, each one sitting on perfectly manicured lots that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. I felt like an imposter in my best dress, the same navy blue one I'd worn to our coffee meeting, driving my 10-year-old Honda through streets lined with luxury cars. Harrison's house was a stunning Tudor-style mansion with ivy-covered walls and leaded glass windows. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed a modest sedan parked beside Harrison's Mercedes, presumably Marcus's car. The contrast between the vehicles seemed symbolic of the gulf that had existed between father and son. Harrison answered the door himself, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. Gone was the businessman's composure, replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. "Maxine, thank you for coming. Marcus is in the library. He's eager to meet you." I followed him through a house that belonged in an architectural magazine, all dark wood paneling and expensive artwork. The library was a gorgeous room with floor-to-ceiling bookcases and a fireplace crackling warmly. Standing near the windows was a man who looked remarkably like a younger version of Harrison, though his clothes were much simpler and his demeanor more reserved. "Marcus, this is Maxine Reynolds," Harrison said, his voice carrying a pride that surprised me. "Maxine, my son Marcus." Marcus stepped forward with a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. "Ms. Reynolds, Dad's told me so much about you, what you did for him. I can't thank you enough." We settled into comfortable leather chairs around the fireplace, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Marcus was a pediatric surgeon, as Harrison had mentioned, but more importantly, he was kind and thoughtful in a way that suggested he'd inherited his father's intelligence without the ruthless edge. "I have to admit," Marcus said, leaning forward earnestly, "when Dad called me and told me about meeting you, I thought it was another one of his manipulations. He's tried so many ways over the years to get me to come back." Harrison's face tightened slightly at this, but he didn't deny it. "But then he told me the whole story, about disguising himself as homeless, about testing people's character, about how your kindness made him realize what he'd become." Marcus looked between his father and me. That's not the kind of story he would have made up 5 years ago. It requires a level of self-awareness he didn't used to possess. We talked for over an hour, and I watched Harrison with his son, seeing a gentleness I hadn't known existed. This wasn't the cold businessman from the articles, or even the grateful man who'd offered me a job. This was a father trying desperately to rebuild a relationship he'd destroyed through years of putting business above family. "I should go," I said eventually, sensing they needed time alone to continue their reconciliation. "Actually," Harrison said, "before you leave, there's something I wanted to discuss with both of you. It relates to your new position, Maxine." He walked to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "This morning, I received some interesting information from my research team. It concerns your ex-husband." My stomach clenched. "Damon? Why would you research him?" "Because I research everyone connected to my employees for security purposes, but what I found is concerning." Harrison opened the folder and spread out several documents. "Damon Reynolds currently works as regional manager for Westfield Hospitality Group. They're one of the companies I'm considering for a major partnership." I stared at the papers, seeing Damon's professional headshot attached to what looked like a business proposal. "I don't understand." "Westfield wants to partner with Blackstone Industries on a new chain of luxury hotels. It's a $2.7 million deal that would essentially make or break their company. The partnership depends entirely on my assessment of their leadership team's character and competence." Marcus was watching this exchange with growing interest. "And Damon is part of their leadership team?" "Regional manager with expansion oversight," Harrison confirmed, "which means his performance and character evaluation would be crucial to my decision about the partnership." The implications slowly dawned on me. "You want me to evaluate Damon. I want you to do your job," Harrison said carefully. "I want you to assess whether Westfield Hospitality, including its regional manager, represents the kind of ethical partnership Blackstone Industries should pursue." I felt a strange mix of emotions, excitement, nervousness, and something that might have been vindication. After months of feeling powerless, I was being handed the ability to impact Damon's professional future. But the responsibility felt enormous. "This seems like a conflict of interest," I said slowly. "It would be if I were asking you to sabotage him," Harrison replied. "I'm not. I'm asking you to evaluate him honestly, the same way you'd evaluate any other potential business partner. Your personal history with him might actually be an advantage. You know his character better than anyone." Marcus leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "What kind of man is he? Your ex-husband?" I considered the question carefully. "Selfish, manipulative when it serves his purposes. He's charming when he wants something. but he has no loyalty to anyone who can't benefit him. I paused, thinking about 35 years of marriage. He's not evil exactly. He's just someone who always puts himself first, no matter who gets hurt. Those sound like important qualities to assess in a business partner, Marcus said quietly. Harrison nodded. The meeting is scheduled for Thursday. Westfield has invited me to tour their flagship hotel and meet their management team. You'd be there as my consultant, observing and evaluating their operations. Will Damon know who I am? Not initially. You'd be introduced as Maxine Blake, an independent consultant specializing in hospitality assessment. Whether you choose to reveal your identity is entirely up to you. I spent the drive home processing this development. Of all the potential assignments Harrison could have given me, my first one involved Damon. The universe seemed determined to force confrontations I wasn't sure I was ready for. That evening, I called my sister Janet for the first time since the divorce. We hadn't spoken much lately. She'd made it clear she'd disapproved of how I'd handled my marriage ending, suggesting I should have fought harder to keep Damon. "Maxine," she said, sounding surprised to hear from me. "How are you holding up?" "Actually, things are looking up," I said, then told her about my new job, leaving out the more unusual details. "That's wonderful. I was so worried about you after everything with Damon and that nanny." Janet's voice carried the careful tone people use when discussing topics they find uncomfortable. "Speaking of which, did you hear about his promotion?" My grip tightened on the phone. "No, what promotion?" "He got moved up to some big regional position with his company. Vienna's been posting about it constantly. They're talking about moving to a bigger house, maybe buying a vacation home. She seems to think this promotion is going to make them wealthy." I thought about the $2.7 million deal Harrison had described, the partnership that would transform Westfield from a mid-level company into a major player in the hospitality industry. If the deal went through, Damon would likely receive substantial bonuses and stock options. He and Vienna would indeed become wealthy. If the deal went through. "That's nice for them," I managed to say. "I know it must be hard to hear," Janet said sympathetically, "but you're doing so well on your own. This new job sounds perfect for you." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment thinking about Thursday's meeting. I had the power to influence whether Damon got the future he and Vienna were already celebrating. The question was, what kind of person did I want to be? The woman who'd given her coat to a homeless stranger wouldn't sabotage someone out of personal vendetta. But the same woman also wouldn't ignore genuine character flaws that could impact a business partnership. I pulled out a notebook and began writing down everything I knew about Damon's character, his work ethic, his treatment of others. If I was going to evaluate him professionally, I needed to separate my personal hurt from objective assessment. The list I created was damning, but it was also honest. Damon was someone who took credit for others' work, who blamed subordinates for his mistakes, who treated service workers dismissively. These weren't just personal grievances, they were legitimate business concerns. By Thursday morning, I felt prepared. I dressed in the new suit Harrison had provided, part of my professional wardrobe budget, and met him at Blackstone Industries headquarters. The building itself was intimidating, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that announced its owner's success to the entire city. "Remember," Harrison said as we rode the elevator to the parking garage, "you're Maxine Blake, consultant. Your job is to observe and evaluate. Be yourself, but be professional." The Westfield flagship hotel was impressive, a luxury property downtown that catered to business travelers and wealthy tourists. The lobby was elegant without being ostentatious, and the staff seemed well-trained and attentive. From a purely business perspective, it looked like the kind of operation Blackstone might want to partner with. The management team was waiting in a conference room on the executive floor. I recognized several faces from the research Harrison had provided, but my attention focused immediately on the man sitting at the head of the table. Damon looked good. Better than he had during our marriage, actually. His hair was styled differently, He'd lost some weight, and his suit was more expensive than anything he'd owned when we were together. Success, or the prospect of it, suited him. "Harrison, welcome to Westfield," said the CEO, a polished man in his 50s named Richard Westfield. "Let me introduce our leadership team." He went around the table, introducing various vice presidents and managers, until he reached Damon. "And this is Damon Reynolds, our regional manager for expansion. Damon's been instrumental in identifying potential markets for our growth strategy." Damon stood and shook Harrison's hand confidently. "Mr. Blackstone, it's an honor to meet you. I've followed your company's success for years." "Thank you," Harrison replied smoothly. "This is Maxine Blake, my consultant. She specializes in operational assessment." Damon turned to me with the same charming smile he'd once used on me, his hand extended. For a moment, I thought he might recognize me. After all, we'd been married for 35 years. But his expression remained politely professional. To him, I was just another business consultant, invisible and unremarkable. "Ms. Blake," he said, shaking my hand briefly, "I look forward to hearing your assessment of our operations." I smiled back, my voice steady. "I'm sure it will be very thorough, Mr. Reynolds." The hotel tour took 3 hours, and I spent every minute observing Damon with the careful attention Harrison had trained me to use. What I saw was exactly what I'd expected, but somehow worse when viewed through professional eyes rather than the lens of a hurt wife. Damon was charming with the executives, deferential to Harrison, but dismissive with lower-level staff. When a housekeeper accidentally bumped into him in the hallway, he snapped at her in Spanish, clearly assuming none of us would understand. When a waiter was slow to refill his coffee during lunch, Damon made a cutting comment about the quality of help these days. Most telling was his presentation about expansion opportunities. He took full credit for market research that I recognized from his late-night phone calls during our marriage. Calls where he'd picked the brains of junior associates, then presented their ideas as his own innovations. "The Nashville market shows tremendous potential," Damon said, clicking through slides that showed demographic data and competitive analysis. "I've identified 17 prime locations for development." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Impressive work. How long did this research take?" "About 6 months of intensive analysis," Damon replied smoothly. I knew it had taken him 2 weeks, mostly consisting of phone calls to a young analyst named Kevin who'd done all the actual work. Kevin had called the house several times, excited to discuss his findings with Damon, not realizing his boss was simply mining his insights. After the presentation, Harrison and I excused ourselves for a private consultation in an empty conference room. "Well?" Harrison asked simply. I took a deep breath. He's exactly what I expected. Charming, presentable, completely self-serving. He treats staff poorly, takes credit for others' work, and lies when it's convenient. Specific examples? I told him about the market research, the dismissive treatment of employees, the small cruelties I'd witnessed throughout the day. Harrison listened without comment, taking notes in his precise handwriting. "The question," I continued, "is whether those character flaws would impact the business partnership. And honestly, I think they would. He's the type to cut corners when no one's watching, to blame others when things go wrong, to prioritize short-term gains over long-term relationships." Harrison studied his notes. "Those are serious concerns for a partnership of this magnitude." "There's something else," I said quietly. "Something personal." "Yes?" "He didn't recognize me. Not once during the entire day. I was married to him for 35 years, and he looked right through me like I was nobody." I felt a strange mix of hurt and liberation saying it out loud. "I don't think it's because I look so different. I think it's because he never really saw me in the first place." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "How does that affect your professional assessment?" "It confirms it. He's someone who only pays attention to people who can benefit him. Everyone else is invisible." I met Harrison's eyes. That's not the kind of partner you want for a long-term business relationship. We returned to the main conference room where the Westfield team was waiting anxiously. I could see the hope in their faces, the expectation that this meeting would change their company's future. Damon looked particularly confident, already counting bonuses he hadn't earned. "Thank you for the comprehensive tour," Harrison said formally. "I'll need some time to review everything with my team before making a final decision. You should hear from us within the week." Richard Westfield's face fell slightly. "Of course. We understand this is a significant decision. Is there anything else we can provide? Any additional information?" "No, you've been very thorough," Harrison replied. "Ms. Blake, do you have any final questions for the team?" All eyes turned to me. Damon was smiling expectantly, probably assuming I'd been impressed by his presentation. For a moment, I considered revealing my identity, watching his face when he realized who I was. But that would have been petty and ultimately pointless. "No questions," I said simply. "I have all the information I need." The drive back to Blackstone Industries was quiet. Harrison seemed lost in thought, and I was processing the strange experience of evaluating my ex-husband's character for business purposes. "When will you make your decision?" I asked as we pulled into the parking garage. "I already have," Harrison said. "The partnership is off the table. Westfield lacks the leadership integrity we require for long-term collaboration." I felt a complex mix of satisfaction and guilt. Because of my assessment? Because of the facts you presented. Character matters in business, Maxine. I've learned that the hard way over the years. Harrison turned off the engine and looked at me seriously. "You did exactly what I hired you to do. You evaluated potential partners objectively and identified serious concerns. That's not revenge. That's good business." 2 days later, Richard Westfield called Harrison to inquire about the partnership status. Harrison's response was professional and final. "After careful consideration, Blackstone Industries has decided to pursue other opportunities. Thank you for your time." I heard about the aftermath through Janet, who called me with news she clearly expected me to find devastating. "You'll never believe what happened to Damon," she said breathlessly. "The big promotion fell through. Some deal with a huge company got canceled, and now Westfield is laying people off. Damon's position was eliminated entirely." "That's unfortunate," I said, surprised by how little satisfaction I felt. Vienna is beside herself. She'd already put a deposit down on a bigger house, bought a new car. Now Damon's scrambling to find another job, and companies aren't exactly lining up to hire middle-aged managers these days. I thought about Damon's dismissive treatment of the hotel staff, his willingness to take credit for others' work, his complete failure to recognize the woman he'd been married to for decades. The job loss wasn't my revenge. It was the natural consequence of his character. "These things happen," I said neutrally. "I thought you'd be more, I don't know, happy about it?" Janet sounded confused. "After what he did to you?" "I'm too busy building my own life to worry about his problems." And that was true. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into my new role at Blackstone Industries. Harrison gave me increasingly complex assignments, evaluating potential partners across various industries. I discovered I had a natural talent for reading people, for seeing past professional facades to the character beneath. My personal life was transforming too. I moved from the studio apartment to a comfortable one-bedroom in a better neighborhood. I bought proper clothes, got my hair done professionally for the first time in months, started taking care of myself again. Most importantly, I began to remember who I was beyond the roles of wife and victim. I was Maxine Reynolds, a woman with intelligence and insight and value that existed independently of anyone else's recognition. 3 months after the Westfield evaluation, I was having lunch with Harrison and Marcus when Marcus mentioned something that surprised me. "Dad told me about your first assignment," he said, cutting into his salad. "The situation with your ex-husband must have been incredibly difficult." "Actually, it was liberating," I said, realizing as I spoke that it was true. For months, I felt powerless about what had happened to my marriage, my life. But that assignment reminded me that actions have consequences, even if they're delayed. "And now?" Harrison asked. I thought about it carefully. Now I understand that the best revenge isn't hurting someone who hurt you. It's building a life so fulfilling that their opinion becomes irrelevant. 6 months later, I was driving through Highland Park on my way to a client meeting when I passed my old neighborhood. On impulse, I decided to drive by the house on Elm Street, the one I'd thought of as home for 15 years. There was a "for sale" sign on the front lawn. I parked across the street and called my sister. "Janet, what do you know about Damon and Vienna's living situation?" "Oh, honey, you haven't heard? They broke up months ago. Right after he lost his job, Vienna decided he wasn't such a catch after all. Moved out and took half the furniture with her. Damon's been trying to sell the house to cover his debts." I looked at the house that had once represented everything I'd lost. The lawn was overgrown, the shutters needed paint, and there was a general air of neglect that suggested no one was taking proper care of it anymore. "Are you okay?" Janet asked, concerned by my silence. "I'm perfect," I said, and meant it. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. "New assignment tomorrow. Major manufacturing deal. Are you ready?" I typed back, "Always." As I put the phone down, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been scrubbing toilets and sleeping on a fold-out bed, believing my life was essentially over. Tonight, I was a successful consultant with meaningful work, financial security, and most importantly, a clear sense of my own worth. The woman who'd given her coat to a stranger on a cold street had saved more than Harrison that night. She'd saved herself too, though she hadn't known it at the time. I raised my wine glass toward the city lights, toasting the future that stretched ahead of me, bright with possibilities I was finally brave enough to embrace. My name is Maxine Reynolds, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the end of everything you thought you wanted is actually the beginning of everything you never knew you needed. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.